Okay. Good morning, everybody. I welcome you all to the first session of the Indian Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons hip arthroplasty course. Now, I'm sure that every one of you in this session would have seen, done, assisted, and have experience to greater or lesser degree with hip arthroplasty. An Austin Moore prosthesis or the hemiarthroplasty is the simplest and easiest operation that we learn as junior residents, and we progress up to complicated revision arthroplasty. It is a big field, and today, before we start talking about hip arthroplasty, I will shed some light on the anatomy of the hip joint, and subsequently I even have these bone models with which real bones with which I'll show you various anatomical aspects which have to be kept in mind when you are performing a surgery. I shall now share my screen, and I hope you can get my screen here, and so welcome to the IOS hip arthroplasty course, and my other two co-faculty are Dr. Vijay Sharma from Jaipur and Dr. Simon Thomas from Delhi. Today's discussion is about the anatomy of the hip joint. It is correctly said that unless you know where you are going, how will you get there? So you must know the destination and then plan the route. So first are bony landmarks. Sorry, let's go back again. First are the bony landmarks and surface anatomy in a hip joint. So we have an anterior superior iliac spine, which everybody can identify, symphysis pubis, which everybody can identify, and the trochanteric flare. So whether the patient is in a supine position or in a lateral position, we should be able to identify these 2 points.
Course.
One minute. Are you able to hear me? Wait a minute. Are we recording? There's some problem with recording. One minute.
Yes,
I
sir.
go back. One minute. Let it come here. 1 second. And let me come here. And meetings. We're going there. I'm not sure. 1 minute. There is some problem happened. My line got disconnected. So I'm not sure how to stop sharing the screen.
You're online, sir. You're only online.
Huh?
We are able to see you, sir.
You're able to see me and the screen?
Yes, sir. Screen also, even the PPT and your voice is also audible.
One minute. Let me get there. Back to meeting. One minute. Okay. And so let us come here. Let's go there. And we're going to place slideshow in the window. Yes. So bony landmarks and surface anatomy, the 3 important aspects that you have to remember are the anterior superior spine, the trochanteric flare, and the symphysis pubis. The other important points to be remembered are the posterior superior iliac spine, the greater trochanter tip per se, and the ischial tuberosity and the pubic tubercle. The first three will be easily identifiable in slim as well as bulky or obese patients. However, certain landmarks may be obliterated by the patient's bulk and girth. The anterior superior iliac spine is the most prominent anterior part of the pelvis and is the principal reference for the limb length measurement, pelvic orientation, and reference point for the cup placement. This is very, very, very important. Okay. The iliac crest follows this laterally to posterior, and the second prominent part of the iliac crest lying posteriorly is called the posterior superior iliac spine. The trochanteric flare can be identified and located with ease as this one rotates the limb while the palm is kept on the upper and lateral part of the thigh when the mobile flare of the lump is obvious. If you are seeing on drawings and if you see on model, you will find it a bit more easier to understand. So I will stop here for a moment and show you a live pelvic model from a human bone so that we can get the basic identification points. Here we go. So if you see this, I have to change my background so that you can see me, unless I put my virtual background as none. Yes. Now you can see this comfortably. So now if you see this, this is your symphysis pubis. There you go. That will be the anterior superior iliac spine. And this in the back will be your posterior superior iliac spine. Okay. And this is the iliac crest. Here, when we keep the femur articulated into that, this is the anterior and this is the posterior. So we can feel this flare of the trochanter, and by deep palpation, we can feel the upper part of the trochanter. Okay. We will come to it in detail a little more. I don't want it to be only slides, so that we can have both talk and slides. So next comes the anterior part of the head of the femur is palpable at the inguinal region, with the femoral artery pulsations being a landmark and reference. So all you need to do is to put an index finger right onto the inguinal region and feel the femoral pulse. Straight behind it is the femoral head. That is how we aspirate a hip joint, and by putting a needle directly from here, you can reach the head of the femur. Both knee joints are identified by locating the joint line by the knee movements. So, palpating the medial and lateral epicondyle, flex and extend the knee, you will know the level of the knee. So, whenever you are going to plan an arthroplasty, you have to square the pelvis. Square the pelvis means ensure that both anterior superior iliac spines are in one line. Then you are going to square the knees, ensuring that both hips are the same position of abduction, adduction or flexion. Then we try to see if both knee joint lines are in the same level, which will tell us about the shortening. Both medial and lateral mandibular are other reference points to measure the limb length or rotational or axial positioning of the femoral component. So once a patient is cleaned and draped and laid on the table, either in a supine position or lateral position, you should be able to identify and put your finger on anterior superior iliac spine, posterior superior iliac spine, the iliac crest, tip of the greater trochanter, trochanteric flare, medial epicondyle of the femur, lateral epicondyle of the femur, the lowermost part of the medial malleolus, and the lowermost part of the lateral malleolus. Another identification point I use for rotation is the second toe. So if the patient is lying supine and the second toe faces the ceiling dead central, it means the hip is in neutral rotation. The second toe goes towards the bed, it is external rotation. The second toe goes away from the bed towards the opposite toe, it is internal rotation or internal torsion. So anatomically, if you look at the vital structures around the hip, this is a drawing I had made for an atlas, and you would get a PDF file with this drawing. So you've got inguinal ligament, lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh superiorly, and anteriorly you have the major vessels, femoral artery, vein, and nerve. And the posterior structures will be the biggest structure is the sciatic nerve and inferior gluteal nerve, and mostly it is muscles. So the surgeon has to be very careful of 6 arteries, 4 nerves, 2 veins, and 2 cutaneous nerves, which are the important structures around the hip. Unlike a knee, which is a very superficial joint, and you get into the joint within few moments of making your incision, the moment you deflect the patella laterally, you are inside the knee. In hip, you have to wade through the tissue. Hip is a deep hidden joint, properly covered by a lot of musculature, and hence you have to be very careful of 6 arteries, 4 nerves, 2 veins, 2 cutaneous nerves, which are the important structures around the hip joint. The vital structures around the hip, the main arteries are femoral artery, medial circumflex femoral artery, lateral circumflex femoral artery. The obturator artery on the medial side, the superior gluteal and inferior gluteal artery on the posterior side. So the femoral along with circumflex vessels are anterior. The obturator is dead medial underneath the adductors, and the gluteal artery is posterior. Next, the nerves which are important are sciatic, the thickest nerve, as thick as your index finger or maybe sometimes as thick as your thumb. Femoral nerve comes anteriorly in the inguinal region. Superior gluteal and obturator nerve again is in the adductor area, and superior gluteal nerve is posterior. Lateral and posterior cutaneous nerves are the superficial nerves that may come in our way. Now, during our next Sunday class, when we will be discussing with the various approaches to the hip joint, I shall be reiterating parts of this anatomy. After this lecture, you can go back to the PDF file that has been sent to you and revise the salient points. If you do have a pelvis and a femur in hand, try manipulating them and putting them inside, assessing and evaluating the situation and the status. So now if you look at the hip joint, this is a transection. So this is the acetabulum, this is the head, this is the hip joint. This is posterior, the sciatic nerve. That's anterior with the femoral nerve complex. And these are the entire muscle bulk on the lateral side. So this drawing in your mind will tell you how to exactly approach the hip. So you can come posteriorly, you can come dead laterally, you can come anterolaterally, you can come posterior laterally, you can come anteriorly, you can come medially. So there are so many openings to the hip where you go through the safe corridor and enter the joint. Only a specific few types of approaches are used for arthroplasty. Not all approaches are used for hip arthroplasty. 3 points of importance regarding the upper femur. One is anteversion of the neck. Number 2 is neck shaft angle. Third, relationship of femoral medulla with reference to the greater and lesser trochanters. Now, this part of anatomy is not given even in anatomy textbooks because It is practical anatomy only for arthroplasty surgeons. So for us, one very important point is anteversion. Second is the neck shaft angle. And third is the relation of the femoral medulla with reference to the greater and lesser trochanters. Anteversion is the angle at which the head faces in the coronal plane with reference to the long axis of the bone. Let us go back again to explain. If you see end on, the deviation of this from the medial femoral condyle is the anteversion. To repeat, the medial femoral condyle, the intercondylar area of the femur is in one axis and head and neck of the femur is another axis. The instant the axis is defined between the two, you get anteversion. Let us come back to this bone and I will show you what I mean. 1 minute. Stop sharing. Here you go. So now this, if you now look at it, end on 1 minute. Let me get the orientation right here. That's a camera. Now if you look at this like so, this with this. So if I am keeping this straight, this goes awry. Now if I am keeping this like so, 1 minute. How do I do it? That is. Are you able to see it? If this is like this, now wherever the head is deviating for me, which you can see like this, now we can understand. So this axis and this axis deviation is your anteversion, which means if the head is like this, it is anteverted. The head is like this, it is retroverted. If this is the bed and the patient is lying like that facing you. So if the head is facing towards the ceiling, it is anteverted. If the head is facing towards the table, it is retroverted. After the slides, once again, I will be playing with the bones and telling you the details of how it should go. Now let's come back to screen share again. So anteversion is the extent to which the femoral head deviates from the axis of the shaft. If the patient lies supine and the femoral condyle lies parallel to the bed, then the head will be lifted towards the ceiling about 9 degrees to 16 degrees, which is a normal anteversion. If the head were to face the ceiling, the head would be markedly anteverted. On the contrary, if it were to get closer to the bed or even go further posteriorly, it will move on from anteversion to neutral and then to retroversion. If the femoral head and the medial femoral condyle face the very same level of direction, then it will be a zero version, which is already retroverted as compared to normal anatomy, because in hip, normal is 15 degrees, anteversion is the normal. At the cost of repetition, anteversion is the extent to which the femoral head deviates from the axis of the shaft. Why I am repeatedly telling this is, even at 5 to 10 degree mishap in anteversion will cause a dislocation of a hip, even if it is a large-headed hemi or a bipolar. 90% of hip dislocations are primarily due to either femoral or acetabular version issues. Please remember this point very, very, very carefully. Anteversion. When one replaces the upper end of the femur, this aspect becomes very important. If the head faces too much posteriorly, when the toes point towards the roof, a large amount of femoral head will be uncovered in the back and a little internal rotation will cause the hip to dislocate. In neutral position, only a small portion of the head remains uncovered and full coverage is achieved in 15 degrees of anteversion. Any further shift of the head more than 15 degrees causes an opening anteriorly, and this would result in excess of anteversion causing anterior stability. So, anteversion more than normal causes anterior instability, and retroversion causes posterior instability. The neck shaft angle. That is very, very simple to understand. That is your neck and that is your shaft. So whatever is the angle between the long axis of the shaft and the long axis of the neck is the neck shaft angle in the coronal plane. So in the AP radiograph, lines are drawn through the long axis of the shaft of the head and neck to show the angle. In large series of anatomical experiments performed right from the time of Henry Gray, 133 degrees has been shown to be the average of neck shaft angle in the European population. Not many authentic studies have been done in Indian population. However, I have measured something like 500 cadaveric femurs, and the anteversion stays between 128 and 136 degrees, telling that this 133 is a fairly decent average. Increase of this angle is called valgus, and bringing it close to the right angle is called varus. So, if the head is like that, up above it is valgus, goes down it is varus. So, 90-degree neck shaft angle will make it markedly varus. 145-degree neck shaft angle will make it markedly valgus. And as we will discuss later in the biomechanics part, valgus positioning is always good. Varus positioning is always bad. The one lesson a beginner has to take from this lecture, even if one point you can take it in your mind, thou shalt not commit the mistake of varus. This is the most important point to assure biomechanical stability and a long-term proper functional outcome of any arthroplasty procedure. Valgus is good, varus is bad. Anteversion is the relation to the rotation of the limb. Neck shaft angle is for abduction and adduction. So, a mistake in version will dislocate the hip in internal or external rotation. A mistake in the neck shaft angle will first cause abnormal forces and failure of the prosthesis, and much later only lead to subluxation or dislocation. With over 300 degrees of movement possible in the average hip in all directions, minimal changes in either of these two would alter the biomechanics and stability in one extreme or other for movements. Next part in anatomy is the relationship of the femoral medulla to the trochanter and femur. So what does it mean? The femoral medulla is an extended hourglass, which means it is wide here, it is narrow here, and wide again below. So at the isthmus, it becomes narrow. It has got widening at the trochanteric area, and as you go down towards the condylar area, it widens again. So it has got a short upper bowl and a long lower bowl hourglass. You can understand from this section of the bone which I have displayed for you. The medullary canal is present medially near the lesser trochanter than to the greater trochanter. So this distance is lesser than this distance. Red is the distance from the greater trochanter. Blue is the distance from the lesser trochanter. So the straight line of the medulla is closer to the lesser trochanter than the greater trochanter. So whenever you are going to start reaming or rasping, you must go very much posterior so as to be able to get a valgus seating of the prosthesis. If you start reaming from here, you will hit the lateral wall and cause a breach in this angle. If you go from here, you will come and touch the medial wall and you will never have a breach. Somebody has got an audio, please mute your audio. The normal acetabulum is anteverted by about 12 to 15 degrees. That is a version of the acetabulum. I will explain that to you on a pelvis in a little later. Unlike femoral version, in acetabular version means an anteversion means as the patient is lying supine, the acetabulum does not fully and directly face the wall on the lateral side. It is tilted 15 degrees forwards towards the roof. Suppose you are lying on the bed, your acetabulum technically faces either the left side wall or the right side wall. But it does not fully face the left side or right side wall. It faces slightly between the wall and the ceiling. And that is the anti-version of the acetabulum or the native version of the acetabulum. If you open a book, two books at 90 degrees, the book covers will face the lateral side. Very simple. So this is facing the lateral wall. This is facing this lateral wall. As we open this pelvis, this is facing this side and this is facing this side. Now, if you open the book more, what happens? These will start facing the floor. Not the roof, but the floor. So that will be a retroverted acetabulum. If we close the book, what happens? This is now facing the roof, not the floor. This is facing this way. So this is an anteverted. I'll repeat the slides again. That is an anteverted acetabulum. That's a retroverted acetabulum. That is a normally placed neutral acetabulum. Once more, hope I have clarified this point. Acetabular depth is the distance from the flare of the outer acetabular margin to the innermost portion of the acetabulum. So, this will be your depth. Let's see, here we are. If you go into the acetabulum, this will be your depth. Where, how deep you are. Acetabular wall thickness is not uniform. You can see that this wall, the thickness here is more, the thickness here is less, the thickness here is more. Normal acetabuli are spheroidal with considerable depth. In patients with old CDH or septic dislocations, the normal femoral pressures are absent and the acetabular roof slopes leaving a shallow acetabulum. I hope I'm clear. 1 minute. Who is not muted? Somebody is not muted. 1 minute. Just a minute. Yes, I have muted them. Yes, okay. Now you won't get disturbance. So normal acetabular are spheroidal with a considerable depth. In patients with old CDH or septic dislocations of childhood, the normal femoral pressures are absent and the acetabular roof slopes leaving a shallow acetabulum. In many pathological conditions like osteoporosis and rheumatoid arthritis, the acetabulum is too deep. So, if there is a persistent dislocation of the head, it would migrate upwards and its constant pressure on the ilium would form a false acetabulum just above the superior lip of the acetabulum. Here is a dysplastic acetabulum or an acetabulum which is very, very shallow. As it could not contain the head has migrated up, and after migration, instead of being the true acetabulum, a false acetabulum is formed. This is common in congenital dislocation of the hip, congenital dysplasia of the hip, and subcapital femoral epiphyseal slippage. One must resist the temptation of placing the cup high anywhere near the false acetabulum. One of the nice mistakes done by beginners is they will cement the cup high up because that is what appears like acetabulum when the hip is opened. The cup should always be present in its real spot. Even if it is difficult and it has to be reconstructed, we have to do it. Locate the true acetabulum and deepen it sufficiently to reach the true anatomic and mechanical axis. On the X-ray on your right, the red line shows the wrong placement of the cup. The green line shows the right placement of the cup. In many pathological conditions, the acetabulum is too deep. This is opposite of a shallow acetabulum and called protrusio. For example, this is a bilateral rheumatoid arthritis. and you can see how much inside the head has gone and how thin, paper thin the acetabular wall will be. Relentless wear in hemiarthroplasty, especially in osteomalacia and osteoporosis, can also cause this form of a protrusio. Acetabular wall does not have uniform thickness. It is very, very clear. That's your acetabulum and that is the wall. I will show you this later. So now what happens is, the roof area where the brunt of the weight transmission is thickest. The thickest portion is the pelvic flare where ilium, ischium and pubis all meet. And that is the point where we use for the principal anchorage screw in a cementless hip and principal big peg, central hole for cementation in cemented hips. Sir John Charnley made the largest pilot hole in this thickest area over which he would ream the acetabulum with a manual reamer. In acetabular wall deficiencies, this part has to be reinforced to allow a normal transmission of forces across the hip joint. A thorough knowledge of hip anatomy is thus essential for correct arthroplasty surgery with long-lasting results. So this was a small talk on the anatomy. Now I will come back to my screen. I will show you a few bones. I will re-emphasize on important points, and thereafter I will hand the stage to Dr. Vijay Sharma of Jaipur, who will add his 10 minutes worth, and then Dr. Simon Thomas will add his 10 minutes worth, after which we will leave the house open to our delegates for asking questions. So let us start with femur. I have to take off the virtual background so that you can see the bones properly. Yes. So here we go. Here we go. Neck shaft angle. Here. Anteversion, neutral, retroversion, neutral, anteversion. Neutral, retroversion. Okay. You can watch the condyle also with me, and with this we'll understand. This is a retroverted hip, there's a neutral hip, there's an anteverted hip. Okay. Now, this is our acetabulum. This is the thickest portion of the wall, this one. This portion is thickest. And this is the thinnest here. If you can see this acetabulum here, there is a cut model and you can look back. The area shaded red. You can see how much thickness is there and you can see how thin it is here, how thin it is here. You can see the shell from inside, how it's like eggshell like. So we have to make sure that any anchorage of prosthesis is done in this area. Of course, when you are talking about acetabular orientation, let us keep this straight for you. Meaning, can you see the acetabulum? You can't. So if the acetabulum faces like that, it is anteverted. If it faces like that, it is retroverted. And I think this should be easier for you to understand. That's your anterior superior spine. That's your posterior superior spine. And here is your acetabulum. Where is it? Okay. So if this is facing like so, retroverted, facing like this, it's an anteverted. This was to just orient you with certain concepts of arthroplasty, and until you are familiar and thorough with these, you will not be able to do 100% perfect arthroplasty every time and any time. Now, Dr. Vijay Sharma, Dr. Simon,
Hi,
and yes, now
sir.
come on, you can tell us.
Hi, good morning all. Dr. Vijay.
Yes, we can see you, we can hear you. Please add your 10 minutes worth.
Yeah, am I audible to all?
Yes, you are clear and clear audible.
Thank you. So, after a thorough presentation of anatomical feature of hip joint by Dr. Prakash sir, he had almost everything covered in his presentation. I would like to add something that is relevant for surgical anatomy of the hip for hip arthroplasty practice. As he already said that hip joint is a ball and socket joint. It is a diarthroidal joint, and it is a very stable joint. Although stability is largely confirmed by bony architecture only. As far as acetabulum is confirmed, the acetabulum surface is oriented approximately 45 degree in abduction and 15 degree in anteversion. It is mostly circular in its superior margin, but it has only enough hemispherical depth to allow for 170 degree coverage of the femoral head. This acetabulum is surgically divided into 4 quadrants by a line drawn from the anterior superior iliac spine through the center of the acetabulum. It is important. I'm talking about the safe zone of the acetabulum. So when a line is drawn from the anterior superior iliac spine through the center of the acetabulum, it divides the acetabulum into 2 quadrants, anterior and posterior quadrant. When another line is drawn just perpendicular to this first line, it again divides into 2, superior and inferior. So the acetabulum is divided into 4 quadrants: posterior superior, posterior inferior, anterior superior, and anterior inferior. These quadrants are important for the safe placement of the screw when you fix your cup in the acetabulum. So the posterior superior is the safest quadrant for the screw fixation. It contains the superior gluteal nerve and vessels and sciatic nerve. Posterior inferior is the second safe. It contains the inferior gluteal nerve and internal pudendal vessel. Anterior inferior is unsafe. It contains the obturator vessels, and anterior superior is unsafe. It contains the external iliac artery. So while fixing your cup with a screw, you should be cautious and you should be aware of the safe zone of the acetabulum. Now, second important thing is transverse acetabular ligament. So when you fix your cup into the acetabulum, this is the most important reference point for the correct positioning of the cup. Your cup should be parallel to the transverse acetabular ligament for your correct version. It's the inferior margin of the cup should be flushed with the transverse ligament. It should not go either too deep, or it should not be too proud from the acetabular ligament. If it is parallel, your version is correct. If it is not parallel, either you are retroverted or you are antiverted. So the excessive retroversion is associated with instability, anterior impingement, and growing pain. The transverse acetabular ligament straddles the inferior joint of the cup, and it defines the normal version of the cup placement. This is particularly useful in difficult cases such as congenital hip dysplasia, where a dysmorphic acetabulum presents a challenge to correct hip placement. So the transverse acetabular ligament is a very important landmark as far as anatomy of the acetabulum is concerned. Now coming to the femoral head. This femoral head is covered with the acetabulum, and it is augmented by labrum, and it is continuous with the transverse acetabular ligament inferiorly. And it is also an important surgical point of pivot. This point is the center of the head, which is often coincides with the level of the greater trochanter. It is important when you assess the X-rays of the hip joint, post-op and pre-op also. And Dr. Prakash had already told that the femoral neck is anteverted at approximately 15 degree and posterior with the posterior condyle of the distal femur from 30. It is about 30 degree at birth, and then as far as he goes, at 15 degree of anteversion is achieved. Femur bowing is to be taken into consideration. It is an important feature. Usually it is anteriorly bowed 1.2 millimeter in the mid portion. The extent of bowing is clinically relevant because if excessive, it may not be possible to utilize long straight implant without considering undersizing. So another important feature is the offset. Offset is defined as the perpendicular distance between the center of the femoral head and the long axis of the femur. It varies independently of the neck shaft angle, although patient with increased valgus tends to have lesser offset, and whereas patient with increased varus have more offset. If the variant is pathological, it is necessary to re-establish the normal hip joint kinematics and abductor function. Another important is Doer's classification. Doers have developed an index that characterizes the calcar to canal ratio. This index is a ratio of the canal diameter at the level of the lesser trochanter to the canal diameter at the point of 10 centimeter distal to it. So as the canal calcar isthmus ratio, which is called Doer's index, when it approaches 1, the prosthesis fits proximally, but it is distally compromised. So in in these type of cases, cemented prosthesis is suggested. Few ligaments are important for the hip stability. There are three main ligaments: iliofemoral ligament, this is called Y ligament or ligament of Bigelow, ischiofemoral ligament, and pubofemoral ligament. Iliofemoral ligament is the strongest ligament of the body. When it contracts, or its contracture leads to deformity, which is flexion and internal rotational deformity. So when these deformities present, you have to release this iliofemoral ligament. Pubofemoral ligament, it leads to tautness in hip extension and abduction, and another is ischiofemoral ligament. I think it is something which I would like to add. Vessels, nerves, which are close to the joint and which are important during performing this type of surgery, well, already illustrated by Dr. Prakash sir. And I think this would like to add something, and now I would like to over to Dr. Simon Thomas. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are audible, Simon.
Okay, that's great. I think this is a wonderful initiative by Dr. Prakash, and on a Sunday morning, there's a wonderful way to utilize our time. And I think a lot of things have been told by Dr. Prakash himself, and certain things which were actually needed to be highlighted have been taken care of by Dr. Vijay Sharma. Actually, while you see, I like to focus on a few points. If you see the acetabulum that Dr. L. Prakash demonstrated, the acetabulum is not a, it is not in one plane totally. There is something called a cotyloid fossa there. When you see a cotyloid fossa is basically a horseshoe shaped. Yeah, he's showing it now. It's a horseshoe shaped, depression inside the acetabulum itself. So this is a very important structure which you need to know. And this cotyloid fossa is inferiorly bound by the transverse acetabular ligament. See, whenever you are going for any hip, total hip replacement, this is a very important landmark: the cotyloid fossa and the transverse acetabular ligament. Why is that? So I'll tell you. Even in an ankylosed hip or a very arthritic hip, the cotyloid fossa is maintained. The cotyloid fossa will be filled with fat. So sometimes there's a medial osteophyte right at that inferior most part of the acetabulum. And once you're going in, you don't know how much medial you have to go and ream. So once you've exposed, you've taken the head off and you have the acetabulum exposed to you, what you need to do is first of all find out your transverse acetabular ligament. Make sure that when you start reaming, your inferior part of the reamer never goes higher. When I was starting to do my total hips, actually my impression was that as soon as you get the reamer, you start reaming, and you start pushing it with your hand into superiorly. So what happens is that if you got a very big acetabulum, you actually start reaming eccentrically, and you attain a very high hip center. So that mistake can be avoided if you take, every time you take a reamer, and you make sure that the inferior part of the reamer is actually very much proximity to the transverse acetabular ligament. So you will not go high. So suppose you start with 44, you don't go to the superior part of the acetabulum. You remain on to the transverse acetabular ligament, and one hand pushes medially, and the other hand, which is superior part, which is hanging on to the reamer, it's actually pulling that reamer inferiorly, so that you make sure that you ream very close to the transverse acetabular ligament. Then as you increase in size, the inferior part of the reamer will again be in contact with the TL, and as the size increases, the superior part will actually go reaming the periphery. That's one step. Secondly, the first 2-3 reamers, what you should do is that you should flatten out the cotyloid fossa. Once the cotyloid fossa is flattened, you will see that you have reached the most medial part of the acetabulum. Then don't try to push the acetabulum medially. And how will you identify cotyloid fossa is that you will see a fat pad there. And once you have initially exposed the acetabulum, you should take a curette or something and take out that fat pad and keep on reaming till you have flattened it. Once you've flattened that cotyloid fossa, try not to go medially at all. Then you only have to expand it superiorly and on the sides. And in the next few reamings, you will realize that you have got one shell which is flat and smooth throughout. That is one part of the acetabulum. Second thing is that you should have a feel. Once you have positioned the patient, you should have a feel of his lumbar spine and the sacrum. Make sure that your lumbar spine and sacrum is actually uh, felt by you by the time you're examining the patient in the OPD. Because if there is any kyphosis or any on any lumbosacral deformity, you have a feel of it. I'll tell you why. That is very important because you have felt that in the clinic, and once you position the patient, you know that the patient is perfectly in a lateral position. At that time also, you have got one, how do you position the patient? You've got a support and on the behind below the sacrum, and you have a support on the pubic symphysis, and in between these supports, the patient is in a lateral position. But what happens is that once you're reaming, pushing, pulling, sometimes this position changes, and the patient who was actually in perfect lateral position when you start may actually be in a little sloppy position. Sometimes, majority of times, because of retraction, the patient comes to you. And if people who are doing a hip replacement by a posterior approach, if the patient is tilted posteriorly and your landmark, you have an orientation that the patient is actually in a lateral position, what happens is that you may think the anteversion is perfectly fine, but actually because the pelvis, the patient is tilted back, the anteversion is not right. The anteversion is less than what you anticipated. But your orientation is with respect to the table and the surroundings. So if the patient's position changes under the drape, you will not know. And in that case, once you palpate, how can you take care of that? Is that once you have placed the patient on in the lateral position, you keep your palm of the hand behind the sacrum and the lumbosacral spine, and that will give you an idea where the lumbosacral spine is going with reference to the shoulder blades. And every time you do one reaming, two reaming, three reaming, gently once on top of the drape only, you can actually feel that sacrum and lumbosacral spine. And if the patient is tilted in between, you can actually compensate it by tilting the table. So if the patient has tilted towards you, you can tilt the, or the patient has fallen forward, you can tilt the table towards you. And if the patient has tilted towards you, you can tilt the table in a vice versa order. So these are important factors which will help you not go wayward with your anteversion and your depth of the acetabulum. I think the length also, apparent length was very well mentioned by Dr. L. Prakash and Dr. Vijay Sharma. But your apparent length is also one thing which you have an idea beforehand, because sometimes it is very difficult. In a patient who was having a preoperative shortening, once you correct the preoperative shortening by a total hip replacement, the abductors become stretched out, and in the lateral position only, you may feel that the hip is actually on the correct, the length is correct, but because of the apparent lengthening, the patient may have lengthening post-operatively. So you may have to compensate for that also. That because of that, the anterior superior iliac spine should be seen pre-operatively both sides, and that is also a very important factor which you should see. This will help you in pre-operative planning. I think the anatomical part, which was covered by Dr. L. Prakash, very well covered. That's the idea, is because if you have an idea of the ASIs and the AIS pre-operatively, you will be able to take care of the length post-operatively as well. I think these are the only factors that I could think of while these talks could be given. If some of you have any doubts or questions, we will be glad to answer.
Yes. Now, one important thing Simon has told very beautifully, which I had reserved it during the surgical procedure, is with the patient falling back in the lateral position, when the patient is fixed in a dead lateral by you pre-operatively, during the process of surgery, either the patient will fall towards you or fall anteriorly, and your acetabular reaming with reference to the theatre table will be correct version. However, with reference to the patient, because the patient has fallen backwards, it is retroverted. So what I normally do is, the instant the draping is done, under the drapes, I will palpate the anterior superior iliac spine and posterior superior iliac spine. We already have an autoclaved white sticky fabric tape ready as a part of our surgical procedure, and I will cut 3 strips of this tape. One I will paste it over the drape or the anterior superior iliac spine. One I will paste it in the posterior superior iliac spine, and one I will post it on the iliac crest. Whenever it falls down with the drape, all my 3 drapes will. Somebody. Mic, 1 minute. Which I'll have to ask him also a little. I'm muting the extra numbers. So those white stickies which you have stuck on the drapes. Now these days we are using the drapes which are actually pasted to the body because they come with adhesive on one side. So that way the drapes won't shift. The patient moves, the drape moves with the patient. So at the point where it is stuck, I'll put a small tape. That way I'll know my orientation of the line. Now I'm happy to invite Dr. Michin Achi also from Hyderabad, who will be our faculty in one of our subsequent lectures also. We have covered almost an hour of lectures today. So I now leave the house open. You can unmute your mic, ask questions. You can specifically ask either Dr. Sharma, Dr. Thomas or myself, or if it's a general question, whoever is most familiar with the answer will answer you. House open for questions. Mahesh Chandewar has raised his hand. Okay, Mahesh, go ahead. No? So either the talk has been so good that there are no doubts left, or the talk has been so poor that none of them could understand it. I only hope it is the first part. Any questions, please?
No, sir, it
Thank
is
you
very
very
clear.
much. Who's it?
Sir,
Please go ahead.
Dr. Ranbir Singh, it was very clear. I have read the notes, and now I think anatomy is very clear in my mind from your talk. No specific doubt has been left.
Thank you, doctor. So let's go back. So I thank all the faculty and my co-faculty and the participants for giving me a memorable Sunday morning. Next Sunday, I will just glance through the surgical approaches. Only the first 3 talks I will be monopolizing because they are dry basic science talks, and I will leave the juicy parts of the surgical tricks and tips, small surgical videos, difficult cases, revision cases, and all those things to my other 2 faculty members who are far more active in doing arthroplasty these days than I am. So I will just do the first 3 talks. Then in between I shall be doing short talks. Good major talks will be done by these 2 people. And then Dr. Michin Achi from Hyderabad will also join us and he will give some talks. We hope during the next 8 to 10 weeks, next 8 to 10 Sundays, we have a nice learning and teaching session. Thank you all very much for this wonderful opportunity and hope to see you next Sunday. You will get the PDF files as well as the link for this talk so that you can review it again at pleasure. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir.